Have you ever caught yourself completely refusing to adopt a better way of doing things? Like you know there's a vastly superior option staring you right in the face, but you just cling desperately to your old habits anyway? Welcome to This Explainer, where we're going to unpack the fascinating psychology of stubbornness. Think about your daily commute for a second. Imagine you're taking your usual, overly familiar route home. Your GPS suddenly chimes in, explicitly telling you there's a new shortcut that's going to save you 10 whole minutes. It's right there on the screen, but what do? You muscle the steering wheel along the old route anyway. You literally ignore the data. It defies all logic, right? Well, today we're exploring the deep science behind that exact universally human behavior, drawing from some really incredible research out of the University of Western Australia. To really get this, we have to start with our species' absolute greatest evolutionary superpower, cumulative cultural evolution, or CCE for short. Now, I know that sounds super technical, but it's really just the process where we pick up new behaviors by observing and imitating others, which lets us accumulate these adaptive tweaks over time. Seriously, this single mechanism is why we went from scraping hides with rocks to, launching rockets and scrolling on smartphones. We watch, we learn, we improve the design, and we pass it on. It is the absolute engine of human progress. But as beautiful as that evolutionary engine is, progress isn't always this smooth, perfectly rational thing. In fact, every single time we stumble across a new, potentially better idea, a hidden war kicks off right inside our brains. Our minds become a literal battlefield of competing instincts. It all comes down to a massive psychological tug-of-war between two powerful forces. In one corner, we have content bias. Think of this as the purely logical, highly analytical side of you that wants the absolute best, most efficient solution. It looks at the math and says, yep, this is definitely faster. But in the other corner, we have maintenance bias. This is your inner conservative, stubbornly demanding we just stick to the familiar, tried-and-true method simply because, well, we already know it. It's that little voice whispering, why change? The old way works just fine. So, which side actually wins when push comes to shove? To figure that out, researchers didn't just hand out some boring survey. They actually brought hundreds of participants into a lab to play a series of highly specialized behavioral games. And these games were custom-built to deeply test social learning and completely expose that tension between logic and stubbornness. They set it up like this. First, they trained people on these moderately efficient, honestly kind of frustrating tasks. One was a padlock task testing cognitive efficiency, where folks had to memorize a clunky 7-digit combo just to open a virtual lock. The other was a maze task testing behavioral efficiency, where they navigated a virtual taxi through a winding 24-move route. The researchers basically forced them to master these suboptimal methods, perfectly simulating our deeply ingrained everyday habits. And then, boom, completely out of the blue, they offered them a brand new option. Put yourself in their shoes for just a second. If you were playing this and suddenly you were shown a route with way fewer turns or handed a padlock combo like 2222222 that takes zero mental effort, would you abandon your old trained method? You'd probably assume our logical brains would instantly jump at the chance to save time and effort, right? Well, the data reveals something totally fascinating about human nature. It turns out people absolutely will switch for a vastly superior option, like a shortcut that saves a massive amount of time. But, and this is the kicker, if the new choice is just equally as good as the old one, people overwhelmingly default to their stubborn maintenance bias. They just absolutely refuse to change. In that maze task alone, the probability of someone maintaining their old inferior habit was an astonishing 94%. Crazy, right? But here is where it gets really interesting, because our individual personality traits completely scramble these baseline results. We aren't all wired exactly the same when it comes to adopting new ideas. The researchers really wanted to know who exactly is stubbornly clinging to the past and who is eagerly embracing the future. To find out, they dug much deeper into the participants' minds. First, they meticulously measured general intelligence, so vocabulary, memory, processing speed, that kind of stuff. Then they measured a personality metric called openness to experience. Now, in real life, we usually think of openness as a super positive trait, right? People who love traveling, trying exotic foods, being intellectually curious. They wanted to see if intelligence and this highly celebrated openness could actually predict who would make the switch. The results gave us a massive, completely unexpected twist. Highly intelligent people did exactly what you'd expect. They showed adaptive switching.
They rapidly evaluated the new info and logically switched to the better, superior solutions. Makes total sense. But get this, highly open people, the exact folks you'd assume would be all about embracing new ways of doing things, actually demonstrated non-adaptive switching. They frequently switched to new options that were entirely equal or, incredibly, even worse than the one they already knew. It turns out being open to experience doesn't necessarily mean being logical. Sometimes it just means choosing a worse option purely to be unconventional, quirky, and different. Because the trained solution had basically become the boring, conventional norm, these highly open individuals were naturally drawn to inferior solutions just to scratch that psychological itch for unconventionality. They literally rebelled against the mundane, even when it actively ruined their efficiency. This all leads us into what we can call the familiarity trap. How quickly does this stubbornness actually set in? Like, how much repetition does it really take before we are completely trapped in our ways, totally blind to the logic of a better alternative? The researchers tweaked the training duration to find out the exact moment the brain locks into a newly formed habit. Some folks practiced their initial clunky solution just a single time before getting the shiny new option. Another group practiced it 3 times, and a final group ran through it 6 times. The stakes here were to pinpoint exactly when our minds just blindly shut the door on innovation. And the stats on this are absolutely staggering. Participants who practiced a task just 3 times were almost 5 times less likely to switch to a novel solution compared to the people who only practiced it once. Specifically, they were 4.95 times more likely to just stubbornly ignore the new idea, regardless of how much better it might have been. The data here is crystal clear. There is a massive, immediate drop-off in flexibility after just 3 rounds. And the crazy part? There was virtually no difference between practicing 3 times and practicing 6 times. The cement sets incredibly fast. It literally takes just 3 repetitions of a simple task to permanently lock in our habits, trap us in that maintenance bias, and completely blind us to better alternatives. 3 times and you're stuck. So what is the big takeaway from all this? Well, we're left with this really profound, almost poetic contradiction in human nature. We are a species fundamentally built on observing others, sharing knowledge, and adapting to survive. Yet our very own intelligence, or weird quirks, like desperately wanting to be different, and the incredibly fast-drying cement of human habit are constantly waging a war against new ideas. Just acknowledging this hidden internal bias is the first completely crucial step to actually overcoming it in our everyday lives. So, knowing all this about how your own brain is wired, the next time you're faced with a choice, are you going to go on autopilot and stick to your stubbornly familiar route? Or are you actively willing to switch?